Hey everyone, welcome to the third and final part of this commission portrait that I've been working on. This third part is focusing on the final touches, finishing the hair, and messing with the general colors overall, and some final touch-ups in Lightroom. I had been struggling with the hair for a little bit. This video will cover day 8 and day 9 of this process. On day 8, I got rid of the initial blocking that I had done for the hair. It was done pretty early on just to have a placeholder there, and now that I was finally going to be doing it for real, I wanted to start fresh. I also thought the part of the hair I'd blocked before was too detailed. It was showing the ends and tips of the hair too much, and I wanted a solid space to work on first, so that I could draw in the individual strands of hair by themselves. So overall, reblocking the hair was a good idea. I also went back and tweaked with the colors a little bit. I noticed the person on the left, while both people's hair were brown, the one that I'm working on right now had a more yellowish tone instead of a red tone. However, on day 8, I was overworking the hair too much. I realized that while I like doing portraits, and even before I was doing illustrations of people, and I was drawing with markers in a sketchbook, most of the figures that I drew didn't have long hair. They either had really short hair, or they had an accessory on, like a scarf or a hat, or something to that nature that hid their hair. And then I started wondering if I had subconsciously been avoiding hair for a long time, which is entirely possible. Regardless, I had to figure out a way to get the hair looking right for this portrait, and unfortunately, I just overworked it too much. While having a lot of detail in the face I still think was a great idea, having that much detail in the hair wasn't exactly necessary. I needed the hair to have enough contrast with the face to give it weight and make it feel like a more complete picture. But nobody was going to really care if the strands of the hair were slightly off or not being represented at all. What was more important was that the hair felt like it had volume, that it was light, maybe some motion, but mostly that it just looked natural and there weren't a lot of extra strands hanging around. I only realized this after a couple hours of working on the hair on day 8. I also realized while doing this that having all the detail made color picking difficult. Getting the right contrast and hue and saturation for the colors was proving to be challenging, and I spent a lot of time tweaking that. After finally realizing I was going to need a different approach, for day 9, I decided to go back and delete parts of the hair that I thought were too much detail. What was good though is I could leave a lot of the work that I had already done. I just needed to get rid of the overworked areas. I realized that the hair was looking like it was in an uncanny valley in between, and I just needed to simplify it a lot. To adjust the color situation, I tried to make it so that there were only 4 shades of brown that I was using, at least for the upper left part that was hitting the light more. The part at the bottom right did need to be darker shades, which I started off with originally, but eventually just went back and sampled the upper left area as well. Even though this wasn't completely accurate to the lighting, it just made things easier so I wouldn't have to be tweaking with the idea that it's a more warmer tone of brown or yellow tone of brown. Finally, I tried to add to the hairline and could move on to the person on the right. I think having the foresight from the person on the left made doing the second hair a lot easier. Another thing that made that process easier is the hair was darker, so I felt the amount of contrast I needed to make, or the varying between the darks and the lights, wasn't nearly as drastic. Another thing is the hair on the right didn't have as many stray strands, so I wasn't tempted to represent those 100% accurately, and I could keep to a more simple style than a realistic style. This meant that I had to not look at the reference as much and trust my own eyes in making decisions. That's definitely true for the very end of the process for the hair on the right, because the end strands I had blocked out needed to not be so blocky. Initially, I tried following the picture more exactly, but it was way overworked. So I ended up deleting those small changes and just putting in my own. In the end, it turned out fine, and I made some last-minute touches to the gradient of blue for the arches. I think adding a really subtle gradient, even though maybe most people won't recognize it, just gave it more dynamic. After finishing the base illustration, I went ahead and put it into Lightroom. I'd initially tried putting it in Photoshop, but I'm more used to photo editing settings, and I don't have as much experience with Photoshop as far as making adjustments with colors and lighting. So Lightroom just made the process a lot faster for me. The main thing I wanted to adjust was the contrast on the faces. The two faces overall seemed a lot lighter than the rest of the image, with not a lot of variation or not as much contrast as I would have liked. So that's the main thing I edited, trying to bring down the highlights, increase the contrast, and darken certain areas. Another thing that I wanted to tweak was the color palette. Overall, the illustration I had made was a lot warmer than I wanted it to be. By making the color palette cooler, I think it emphasized the blue much better and it fixed some of the skin tones. And finally, I wanted the sharpness and clarity to come out a little more. I think being able to see the edges of the shapes or having those a little more accentuated makes it look more like an illustration instead of a digital painting. And that's a style that I really wanted to make sure was emphasized or brought out. Even though this commission took almost 10 days, I learned a lot of things about the background, about making patterns, not overworking certain areas, skin tone, and just making sure that I was focusing on what was necessary. It was a great opportunity, and if I were to ever get a commission or project again with faces, I would definitely take it. I hope you enjoyed seeing me learn throughout this commission, and thanks for watching.